Okay, good morning outreach as well. We're going to talk about leadership today. What is that? That's a really hard thing for people to teach or talk about because it's so nebulous. But guess what? It's probably the most important thing on whether you'll be successful or not successful. Okay, I'm telling you this from experience. If you have leadership qualities or skills or you can hone them, that will make a difference in how much you make in your career, without question. So it's an interesting subject, but it's not a science, that's for sure. So let me ask comments. How many people raise your hand if you think, I think I'm a pretty good leader? We got a few. Okay, and some of you, I kind of know who raised your hand. You do some things around leadership, student groups and that kind of thing. And the surprising thing is that most people can be great leaders, but they think leadership in terms of management, leading a group of people, but it's not necessarily the case. It's really the ability for people to influence others is critical to it. And so what are those skills that allow you to do it? So just some comments from you. What do you think some of the qualities or attributes of a leader are? Anybody? Yes? Being able to delegate. I'm really good at that, aren't I, Ollie? Okay. Say that louder. I've got one ear's decorative, the other one. Yes, be consistent. Anything else? Yes.
Knowing how to serve people.
Yes, that's a good one. Yes, others. Knowing how to serve. Yes. Probably integrity is important. I mean, when I go through these slides, some of the things I found on leadership, some of the comments, they almost discount personal characteristics quite a bit. It's odd, because we all know that it's part of your personal characteristics. I think integrity is critically important because people have to trust you. They don't trust you, and they can see, because if you're working with a group of people and you're leading people and they can see that you don't have integrity, you start losing your following. You start losing people's ability to follow. I really think, and I'm going to talk about this, two things that are very, very important to me. I've thought about this an awful lot, and I kind of thought about it around Toyota's respect for people. I wasn't necessarily the most respectful person when I was in industry, and I really learned a lot about this and researched it quite a bit. I was respectful, but I didn't really get that like I probably should have. But then I thought about, how do you be respectful then? Because there's so many people that aren't really respectful, but they pretend to be. So they say the right things to people because they should. They treat them with respect because they're supposed to, but they don't genuinely respect people. And the funny thing about humans, they detect that very easily. They know that it's phony. Stepchildren know it's phony, right? When the step-parent pretends like they love them, but they really don't. People detect that. So the respect has to be genuine, very genuine. Now, what really, in my opinion, what allows you to respect people? Now, this is becoming like a church service. Humility. In my opinion, you must be a humble person. If you're not a humble person, I don't know that you have the ability to respect. If you can't respect, I don't know that you have the ability to lead. Just my opinion. No science behind it, but. So, here's some things, what leadership is not. This is a contributing writer for Forbes magazine. Leadership has nothing to do with seniority or one's position in the hierarchy of the company. This isn't about what my position is. Leadership has nothing to do with titles. You don't need a title to lead. You can be a leader in your place of worship, your neighborhood, your family, without having a title. Leadership has nothing to do with personal attributes. This is the one that I kind of had a little bit of trouble with myself. Say the word leader, most people think of domineering, take charge, charismatic individuals. Those with charisma don't automatically lead. But personal attributes, personally, I think integrity and respect and humility are personal attributes, and I think they're very important. Leadership isn't management. Typically, managers manage things, leaders lead people. Two different things completely. How some of the most respected business thinkers define leadership. Peter Drucker. Has anybody heard of Peter Drucker? I don't know about now, but in management schools, he's a philosopher of management that's highly regarded. The only definition of a leader is someone who has followers. So this writer says, really, this instance of tautology is so simplistic as to be dangerous. A new army captain is put in command of 200 soldiers. He never leaves his room or utters a word to the men or the women in his unit. Perhaps routine orders are given to a subordinate. By default, his troops have to follow orders. Is the captain really a leader? Commander, yes. Leader, no. Drucker is, of course, a brilliant thinker of modern business, but this definition is too simple. So Drucker's wrong about leadership. Warren Bennett's leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. Every spring you have a vision for a garden with lots of work, with carrots, tomatoes becoming reality. Are you a leader? No, you're a gardener. Bennett's definition seems to have forgotten others. So my point here is, see how difficult this topic is for people? These are great thinkers and they're missing it. Bill Gates, as we look ahead into the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. This definition includes others, and empowerment is a good thing, but to what end? I've seen many empowered others in my life, from rioting hooligans to Google workers who were so misaligned with the rest of the company they found themselves unemployed. Gates' definition lacks the parts about goal and vision. Right? So Maxwell, if I can read that, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. I like minimalism, but this reduction is too much. A robber with a gun has influence over his victim. A manager has power to fire a team member, which provides a lot of influence. But does this influence make a robber or a manager a leader? Maxwell's definition omits the source of influence. They have power, position power in the organization. I can fire people, but I can't influence or lead them. So what is leadership? Leadership is a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal. And later we'll talk about goal. Goals probably shouldn't be there. It should probably be more about vision, why we do what we do. You remember policy deployment? We talked about who should we be in 5 years, what's our vision, why are we here? It should probably be a little broader than goal to me, because goal doesn't necessarily motivate people, but vision does. Leadership stems from social influence, not authority or power. Leadership requires others. That implies they don't need to be direct reports. Can be anybody. No mention of personality traits or attributes or even title. There are many styles, many paths to effective leadership. It includes a vision. I included this. I took the liberty. Not influence with no clear direction. Lastly, what makes this definition so different from many of the academic definitions out there is the inclusion of maximizes the efforts. You get something of value from the organization that you're pulling your way, that you're leading, who are following. Again, my view, you must have respect for people to socially influence behavior to the point of maximizing efforts. And this is a really important point, I think. Very, very important, because I've seen people, and here's one thing I'll hear from managers sometimes, they'll say, you know, we need to really show people respect because we need their buy-in. We need their buy-in. Does that sound like a great statement? What's implied in that? Seems so simple, the statement. Seems okay on the surface, but there's a problem with that. Why do I need your buy-in? No, I'm trying to manipulate you. I'm going to give you a ham at Christmas so you like me and do what I tell you, right? I don't need your buy-in. I need your ideas. I need your help. If I really want to get your help and your ideas, I need you to be an inspired person who cares, who wants to help with the vision of the company. So I don't need your buy-in. I need your efforts and your mind. I need your commitment. I need all those things because I need the organization to care and want to help us achieve this idea of who we want to be. So it's not about, if I say I need your buy-in, that implies also that I've already constructed the solution. I don't need your input, and here it is, now buy into it. It's really, it says a lot. So respect for people is critically important. And humility is requisite to the ability of having respect. You can't be a respectful person if you're not humble. You just can't. I don't think you can. Don't think it's possible. Okay, 13 Habits of Humble People, another contributor of Forbes magazine, because I think this is important. Humble people can receive a bad rap. Humility is frequently associated with being too passive, submissive, or insecure, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Instead, humble people are quite the opposite. Confident and competent in themselves so much that as a result, they seek to self-actualize by helping others. Humble people are still efficacious? They just don't feel the impetus to boast about themselves, but instead let their actions speak for the ideals. To be humble is not to think less of oneself, but to think of oneself less. So humility is a great trait. Unlike the first couple of slides talking about personal characteristics are important, this is critically important, to be humble. So therefore, in my opinion, forget about respect for a minute. Try to evaluate whether you're a humble person or not. And if you're not, you got a problem. You're not going to be a great leader. To help identify what humble looks like, here are 13 habits that this author has mentioned. You don't have to memorize those, but these are habits that you would expect to see in people who have humility. Lead as if you had no power. Do you remember John Shook here talking about that? He made a statement, this Hagashi, who's the president and CEO of Numi, talked to Gary Convis, who was later the Toyota executive vice president, telling him, and I've heard Convis, I've seen articles with him talking about this also, lead as if you have no power. Because then you're going to prove to yourself that I can pull people my way with our vision without using force. Because I've got to test my ability to lead. I can't have an artificial influence like I can fire you or I can tell you what to do. So I can test my ability to pull an organization my way. This is a great statement here. In order to engage in a conversation about leadership, you have to assume you have no power, that you aren't in charge of anything, and that you can't sanction those who are unwilling to do your bidding. If given this starting point and you can mobilize others and accomplish amazing things, then you are a leader. If you can't, well then you're just a bureaucrat. You're just a person using your authority to force people to do what you'd like them to do. Great leaders don't need the authority. Leading with respect as a teacher. And this is a Tai Chi Ono thing. Taiichi Ono and another manager had been touring several Toyota factories. During a conversation between Ono and the manager observed that several factories were misapplying the Toyota production system. Then the manager asked Taiichi Ono, "I was wondering why you didn't instruct the workers to correct it as we walked through." Ono then responded with this lesson: "I am being patient. I cannot use my authority to force them to do what I want them to do. It would not lead to good quality products. What we must do is persistently seek understanding from the shop floor workers by persuading them of the virtues of the Toyota system." After all, manufacturing is essentially a human development that depends heavily on how we teach our workers. So what Ono is saying is, you've got to be very, very careful about using your power, because you're trying to harness this great energy of that organization. You're trying to harness the creativity of people, and you're trying to have the inspiration there that's going to convert the waste in that organization. Be very, very careful about using authority, because you could undermine that whole effort. And if you're really a leader, you don't need it. He's saying, persuading them of the virtues of the Toyota system. He's got an idea, why we're here, what we do, a vision. Persuade them of that vision. Be a preacher. Convert their souls. Have them excited to help you achieve it. Be very careful about telling them what to do. You could lose their heart and soul. So therefore, you must be a leader. Therefore, Ono would say you must have respect. Therefore, you must be a humble person to be able to do that. Tricky, but powerful. So we'll talk about a couple of leadership styles. Empowerment was kind of an A's thing. Employee empowerment is the process of giving frontline employees authority to make decisions once reserved for managers. Empowerment, more correlated with the Theory Y style of management of Douglas McGregor. This is a coaching style, while McGregor's Theory X was more of authoritative style. With Theory Y, leaders have more optimistic view of the ability to get work done from employees. This makes them more likely to implement empowerment than Theory X leaders, who are less trusting of worker capability. So over the years, I've been trying to move from Theory X to Theory Y. I believe in Theory Y. But empowerment by itself has a little bit of a weakness. It has total faith and trust without necessarily a vision of the system, and it doesn't really talk about how you inspire or how you lead. Then there's leadership style, the teacher. Management systems paired with empowerment. Meaning, how do you teach if you don't have a system to teach? It's very difficult. So if you go into a shop that's a batch processing shop that's just a mess, and it hasn't been 5S, it looks like your project, Nina. It looks like your project with no 5S. You can vouch for me. That was pretty bad in there, wasn't it? Yeah, pretty bad. And there is no system. There are no rules. There is no structure. There's nothing to really learn from. So it's very, very difficult to teach people when you don't have a great system developed. When you have a great system developed, it makes it much, much easier for you to be a teacher in that system. So for instance, standardization of process, I see deviation. Standardization of the facility, I can see deviation. Means I can teach when I see it. Standardized management work, I look for deviation. Hoshin plan or policy deployment, I understand our direction, the why we exist. I can preach it. Continuous improvement, I can improve the standards. So what I'm saying is, teaching's great, but what do you teach? If there's not a structure in place, if you don't have a Toyota production system, you don't have a great operating system, then it makes it very difficult for you to be a teacher. It makes it almost impossible. You would never want to empower people in that system, because their improvements would be random. It wouldn't necessarily be improving an existing system, making it better, because there's no system to make better. So it'd be very random. Okay, now I'm going to give Bob some credit. I'm going to say he's a teacher, empowerment, and authoritarian. I'm going to give him all three. And I give him all three because he taught, he empowered, but the empowerment was of all the employees that are building the car. Loved them. Gave them everything they could possibly want. Anything they wanted. Bob, we need a drinking fountain. We only have 12 minutes for a break, and that one's 50 yards away. Get them a drinking fountain. They could get whatever they want. He loved them. So he empowered 2,000 people, and he brutalized 200. So he had a little bit of both. And he was a teacher because he understood the system very well. And he spotted deviation. And when he spotted deviation to the system, he taught. Brutal teacher, but he did teach. So management styles combined, the business environment may dictate the style. For example, if the job market is strong, a heavy authoritarian approach may be very problematic. So you got to be very careful about what culture you're working in and what you use. Bob's approach probably wouldn't work out west in Silicon Valley. He would have no one working there, right? Bob's approach might work in Detroit if somebody has no other alternative but that place to work. So you got to be really careful with that one. And it's not ideal. So authoritarian, not effective long-term. And I'd also say authoritarian is very personality dependent. Your results of an organization depends on the personality. The person leaves, you definitely get better or worse depending on who replaces them, because you're dependent upon this authoritarian for control. And that's my explanation of why early Detroit, 50s, 60s, they had people like that, because their systems weren't highly developed like Toyota. So they were dependent upon these tough managers because they had to have somebody control this beast, and they didn't have a system that did it for them. So they were personality dependent, not process dependent, like Toyota. Toyota could teach. Toyota says, we teach our people. We inspire them. They go to Toyota not to make cars, but to make people. Because they have a system. My point about a system, right? You can't teach and you can't empower if you don't have structure. If you don't have well-developed systems, you can't teach and you can't empower. You need an ogre because there's no control of the place. You need to be personality dependent on an authoritarian. Teacher, somewhat effective, but requires a system. Empowerment can be effective with a highly defined system. Remember how I said completely relinquish control to the people that run the operation or that actually build the product? You can. If you have a well-developed system, it probably would be effective. But everyone needs to know how the system functions. Then you have teacher empowerment. If you combine the two, it's highly effective. Now we have a system. We have people who are completely empowered. I want a drinking fountain. I get a drinking fountain. I know that's a silly example, and I have people teaching, helping as leaders, why we do what we do. And then finally, teacher empowerment authoritarian. I think most effective. Now, a lot of people would argue with me about that. In other words, there's got to be some element of control there, in my opinion. Some. Got to reserve the right here and there. Okay, now here's my argument for that. This is Taiichi Ohno. Remember Taiichi Ohno said, I don't want to tell them what they're doing wrong. I want to try to persuade them to learn our system. I want to lead. I want them to come along, right? Good guy, right? Good guy who just cares about humanity. He's got a great system, and he's going to lead them, and he's going to have them come along. Except for this. Does anybody know what that is? Ohno would walk out to the Gemba, and he would draw a circle on the floor, and he'd say, stand in that circle till you learn something. Does that sound like respect for people to you? How would you like that? How would you like, hey, look, I noticed I didn't think you were paying attention in class. I want you to stand right here the whole class, and when we're done, I want you to tell me what you learned. Does that sound respectful? So, I kind of question this a little bit. To me, Ohno sounds a little bit like Bob. Now, on the other hand, he loved the people that put the parts together. And he was really very, very tough on the manager. And by the way, he was highly effective. I love this quote from him, too. Data is, of course, important, but I place greater emphasis on facts. How many people are in senior design? Good luck with the data. I mean, I know you have to manipulate it. I understand that. But when you get it, you'll start seeing how it doesn't necessarily tell you what you want it to tell you. But you have to analyze it. Data's good. It's important. But I place greater emphasis on facts. What Ohno's saying is go to the Gemba. Understand what's really happening. So here's this guy. Now, to further my case on Ohno, help me, Ali. I might have to downsize this for a minute. And you've seen this before, but I just want you to see this and hear what he's saying, because this guy, this Ohno walking around loving everybody and hugging them is not necessarily the truth.
You know, whenever he goes to Gemba and finds that the supervisor is not really looking his affairs, grabs the neck, bring him over to his place, and do a circle with the chalk, and tell him, you stay in there and have a good look till I come back. So everybody got scared and trembled. But, and he was true, he was very tough on the managers, but not on the operators,
That sounds a lot like Bob. It sounds like he's got a little bit of authoritarian mixed in there, doesn't it? Okay, you've heard this one before, but I'm going to sum it up.
Is improvement of leadership, which we commonly call supervision. I think that it should be called leadership. Leading people to help them to do a better job, be it in management or on the factory floor. Supervision should be replaced by leadership. There's no secret, once again, about what leadership is. What leadership must do is to help people.
So you must be great leaders if you're going to make a fortune and do great and change companies. You must have that, or you will not. You will not make it to high levels within the organization. I just promise you that. It's critically important for you to know that. It's something you should really think about. Now, I put this on Canvas, just for your benefit. You don't have to turn it in. But it is the Blake and Mouton Managerial Grid for Leadership Assessment. And I really love how this is formulated, because you'll notice after you do this and then you calculate your scores around people and tasks, this is the matrix that you plot. And they want you to be a 9-9 team leader. It's really taking into account humans and how you, and process and task, and where do you stand on that grid? So One thing I want to caution you about when you take this is what people need to do when they take surveys, and I've got to watch it myself. Sometimes you have a tendency to answer the way you think. That sounds good. I think I'm kind of that way, but try to be as accurate as you possibly can to see where you stand on this grid. And then you kind of get a sense of, okay, here's the work I need to do to improve my ability to lead. So the great thing about this is leadership isn't necessarily tied to experience. It's more about who you are and how you think and how you treat people and how you work with people. You can do that here. You can develop your skills around that here. So then, let's see, I've got one more. I want you to watch this.
How do you explain when things don't go as we assume?
Uh-oh. I hit the wrong thing. Oh, here we go. I think I've screwed up my cursor. Okay. All right. Oh, I see. Yeah, thanks. Try that again. Am I playing the right one? Let's play this.
How do you explain when things don't go as we assume? Or better,
Think of our vision. Remember policy deployment. Think of the vision of in policy deployment going through this.
Why is Apple so innovative? Year after year after year after year, they're more innovative than all their competition. And yet they're just a computer company. They're just like everyone else. They have the same access to the same talent, the same agencies, the same consultants, the same media. Then why is it that they seem to have something different? Why is it that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement? He wasn't the only man who suffered in a pre-civil rights America, and he certainly wasn't the only great orator of the day. Why him? And why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled powered manned flight when there were certainly other teams who were better qualified, better funded, and they didn't achieve powered manned flight, and the Wright brothers beat them to it? There's something else at play here. About 3.5 years ago, I made a discovery, and this discovery profoundly changed my view on how I thought the world worked, and it even profoundly changed the way in which I operate in it. As it turns out, there's a pattern. As it turns out, all the great and inspiring leaders and organizations in the world, whether it's Apple or Martin Luther King or the Wright brothers, they all think, act, and communicate the exact same way, and it's the complete opposite to everyone else. All I did was codify it. And it's probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done, that's how most sales is done, and that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do, we say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This explains why every single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3 player from Apple, or a phone from Apple, or a DVR from Apple. But as I said before, Apple's just a computer company. There's nothing that distinguishes them structurally from any of their competitors. Their competitors are all equally qualified to make all of these products. In fact, they tried. A few years ago, Gateway came out with flat-screen TVs. They're eminently qualified to make flat-screen TVs. They've been making flat-screen monitors for years. Nobody bought one. And Dell came out with MP3 players and PDAs. And they make great quality products, and they can make perfectly well-designed products, and nobody bought one. In fact, talking about it now, we can't even imagine buying an MP3 player from Dell. Why would you buy an MP3 player from a computer company? But we do it every day. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. The goal is not to do business with everybody who needs what you have. The goal is to do business with people who believe what you believe. Here's the best part. None of what I'm telling you is my opinion. It's all grounded in the tenets of biology, not psychology, biology. If you look at a cross-section of the human brain, looking from the top down, what you see is the human brain is actually broken into three major components that correlate perfectly with the golden circle. Our newest brain, our Homo sapien brain, our neocortex, corresponds with the what level. The neocortex is responsible for all of our rational and analytical thought and language. The middle two sections make up our limbic brains, and our limbic brains are responsible for all of our feelings, like trust and loyalty. It's also responsible for all human behavior, all decision-making, and it has no capacity for language. In other words, when we communicate from the outside in, yes, people can understand vast amounts of complicated information like features and benefits and facts and figures. It just doesn't drive behavior. When we communicate from the inside out, we're talking directly to the part of the brain that controls behavior, and then we allow people to rationalize it with the tangible things we say and do. This is where gut decisions come from. Sometimes you can give somebody all the facts and your figures, and they say, I know what all the facts and details say, but it just doesn't feel right. Why would we use that verb? It doesn't feel right. Because the part of the brain that controls decision-making doesn't control language. And the best we can muster up is, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Or sometimes you say you're leading with your heart, or you're leading with your soul. Well, I hate to break it to you, those aren't other body parts controlling your behavior. It's all happening here in your limbic brain, the part of the brain that controls decision-making and not language. But if you don't know why you do what you do, and people respond to why you do what you do, then how will you ever get people to vote for you or buy something from you, or more importantly, be loyal and want to be a part of what it is that you do? Again, the goal is not just to sell people who need what you have. The goal is to sell to people who believe what you believe. The goal is not just to hire people who need a job. It's to hire people who believe what you believe. I always say that, there's if you hire people just because they can do a job, they'll work for your money. But if you hire people who believe what you believe, they work for you with blood and sweat and tears. And nowhere else is there a better example of this than with the Wright Brothers. Most people don't know about Samuel Pierpont Langley. And back in the early 20th century, the pursuit of powered man flight was like the dot-com of the day. Everybody was trying it. And Samuel Pierpont Langley had what we assume to be the recipe for success. I mean, even now, you ask people, why did your product or why did your company fail? And people always give you the same permutation of the same three things. Undercapitalized, the wrong people, bad market conditions. It's always the same three things. So let's explore that. Samuel Pierpont Langley was given $50,000 by the War Department to figure out this flying machine. Money was no problem. He held a seat at Harvard and worked at the Smithsonian and was extremely well connected. He knew all the big minds of the day. He hired the best minds money could find, and the market conditions were fantastic. The New York Times followed him around everywhere, and everyone was rooting for Langley. And how come we've never heard of Samuel Pierpont Langley? A few hundred miles away in Dayton, Ohio, Orville and Wilbur Wright. They had none of what we consider to be the recipe for success. They had no money. They paid for their dream with the proceeds from their bicycle shop. Not a single person on the Wright Brothers team had a college education, not even Orville or Wilbur. And the New York Times followed them around nowhere. The difference was Orville and Wilbur were driven by a cause, by a purpose, by a belief. They believed that if they could figure out this flying machine, it'll change the course of the world. Samuel Pierpont Langley was different. He wanted to be rich, and he wanted to be famous. He was in pursuit of the result. He was in pursuit of the riches. And lo and behold, look what happened. The people who believed in the Wright brothers' dream worked with them with blood and sweat and tears. The others just worked for the paycheck. And they tell stories of how every time the Wright brothers went out, they would have to take 5 sets of parts because that's how many times they would crash before they came in for supper. And eventually, on December 17th, 1903, the Wright brothers took flight. And no one was there to even experience it. We found out about it a few days later. And further proof that Langley was motivated by the wrong thing, the day the Wright brothers took flight, he quit. He could have said, that's an amazing discovery, guys, and I will improve upon your technology. But he didn't. He wasn't first, he didn't get rich, he didn't get famous, so he quit. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And if you talk about what you believe, you will attract those who believe what you believe. Well, why is it important to attract those who believe what you believe? Something called the law of diffusion of innovation. And if you don't know the law, you definitely know the terminology. The first 2.5% of our population are our innovators. The next 13.5% of our population are our early adopters. The next 34% are your early majority, your late majority, and your laggards. The only reason these people buy touch-tone phones is because you can't buy rotary phones anymore. We all sit at various places at various times on this scale, but what the law of diffusion of innovation tells us.
Okay, you can watch the rest of that. It's very interesting, but how I want to relate that to you, remember establishing organizational vision. Your vision statement defines your long-term aspirations. It explains why you're doing what you're doing. Companies that establish vision, as leaders, if you can convince people why you do what you do, rather telling them what they need to do, you'll have people follow you, and they'll give you their blood, sweat, and tears rather than work for a paycheck. So you have to have a purpose that's meaningful that you can share with people the why. It's critically important. There's your quiz.